Hey guys, tonight you are settling in, maybe under a weighted blanket, definitely with the lights dimmed, ready to drift off to the soothing sound of, well, me, telling you about Vikings. But not just any Vikings. Not the axe-wielding, monastery pillaging, raid your local village Vikings you see in the movies. Oh no, tonight we're tracing the path of the traitor Vikings, the ones who decided. You know what? The North Sea is cool, but have you considered the Caspian Sea? Yes, that's right. We're following them thousands of miles inland, across vast plains and down endless rivers, all the way to an unexpected, salty, landlocked sea that probably smells faintly of sturgeon and disappointment if you were hoping for the ocean. It's a journey so long, so arduous, and frankly, so packed with portages and paperwork, okay, maybe not paperwork, but definitely tolls and negotiations, that it might just be the most boringly fascinating history you've ever encountered. You probably won't survive this level of historical detail without at least nodding off once or twice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Always fun to see how far these sleepy vibes travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on the rocky shores of Scandinavia, sometime around the late 8th or early 9th century. The air is crisp, maybe a little damp, and the smell of pine and sea salt is everywhere. You're not a farmer, not really a fisherman either. You've heard tales, whispers carried on the wind, of lands across the narrow sea to the west. Places like England and France, ripe for the, shall we say, acquisition of goods. That's one path, the one most people think of when they hear Viking. But there's another whisper, a different kind of pull, coming from the east. Tales of silver, silks, spices, and exotic goods, not just there for the taking, but there for the trading. This eastward pull wasn't about swift raids and quick getaways. It was about commerce, about establishing networks, about becoming long-distance merchants in a world that was just starting to connect across vast distances. Think of it less like a smash and grab and more like setting up an international import-export business, except your delivery trucks are longboats, and your roads are, well, mostly rivers. And the boring part? It comes from the sheer, relentless logistics of it all. This wasn't a single, dramatic battle. It was years, decades, centuries of rowing, hauling, bargaining, waiting, and dealing with bureaucracy, ancient style. It's the kind of history that puts you to sleep not because it's dull, but because the sheer monotony of the effort is almost meditative. You can almost feel the rhythmic pull of the oar, the endless ripple of the water, the gentle rocking of the boat. So, you've heard these tales of the East. Maybe you've even seen glimpses of the goods filtering back through intermediaries. A silver dirham coin from the Abbasid Caliphate, unlike anything minted in Northern Europe, or a piece of fine cloth that feels impossibly soft. These aren't just shiny objects, they're proof of concept. They show that there's a world of wealth out there, a world connected by rivers and trade routes, and that the people who control those routes get very, very rich. And let's be honest, getting very, very rich with less risk of getting your head bashed in by an angry Saxon farmer sounds pretty appealing compared to the Western raiding scene. The motivation is simple and universal: wealth and opportunity. Northern Europe, while not exactly impoverished, didn't have the same access to the luxury goods and vast silver mines of the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. Silver, in particular, was the lifeblood of the Viking economy. It was used for trade, for payment, and for display of status. Those big, chunky silver rings and necklaces? They were basically wearable bank accounts. While silver was available in the West, the Eastern sources, particularly the massive mines in Central Asia, offered a seemingly endless supply. And accessing that supply meant going east. This eastward push wasn't a sudden decision. It was a gradual exploration, driven by intrepid individuals and small groups. They weren't setting out to conquer Persia. They were looking for trade partners, for markets, for sources of valuable goods. The early Eastern explorers were probably more traders and adventurers than typical warriors, though they certainly needed to be capable of defending themselves. Think of them as the early venture capitalists of the Viking Age, investing time, risk, and effort for the potential of massive returns. They were pioneers, pushing into unknown territories, navigating complex political landscapes, and figuring out the hard way how to get a boat from the Baltic Sea all the way to the Middle East. One mainstream historical fact you should know is that the trade routes connecting the Baltic Sea to the Black and Caspian Seas were collectively known to Arabic chroniclers as the Rus routes, named after the people, often identified with the Vikings, specifically Swedish Vikings, who primarily used them. This wasn't just a few guys in a canoe. This was a system of pathways that, at its peak, facilitated a significant exchange of goods and cultural influences between Northern Europe and the wealthy empires of the South and East. A quirky tidbit related to this early period? The earliest evidence of Viking presence deep in Eastern Europe isn't always hoards of silver. Sometimes, it's things like bear claws or animal teeth found in graves, interpreted by some archaeologists as evidence of shamanistic practices or beliefs brought from the north, mingling with local customs. It's a small detail, easily missed, but it hints at the cultural baggage these travelers carried with them on their incredibly long journeys. And, as with most things in history, historians still argue whether the primary initial motivation for these eastern voyages was trade, exploration, or the search for tribute and resources beyond what could be easily raided in the West. Was it driven by surplus population, political ambition, or simply the allure of the unknown and the potential for riches? The truth is likely a complex mix of all these factors, varying by individual, group, and time period. But whatever the exact blend of motives, the result was the same: a steady, persistent movement of people and ships eastward, towards the rising sun and the promise of distant markets. You're stepping onto that path now, leaving the familiar coast behind, and turning your gaze inland, towards the vast, winding rivers that lead to the heart of a different world. It's a long, slow journey, perfect for drifting off. You've made the mental shift. The lure of the West, the quick smash-and-grab raids, while tempting for some, feels limited, finite. The East, however, holds the promise of something deeper, something continuous. It's not just about taking what's there. It's about plugging into a system, a vast network of trade that stretches across continents, connecting Scandinavia to the heartlands of the Byzantine Empire and the glittering cities of the Islamic world. This is the true call of the East. The siren song of silver, yes, but also of silk that feels like spun air, of spices that can transform bland food into a feast, of jewels that catch the light in ways you've never seen before. Think of it like this: raiding in the West is like finding a wallet on the street. Nice score, but it's a one-off. Trading in the East is like investing in a global corporation. It requires more effort upfront, more patience, more navigating complex relationships, but the potential return is exponential. And frankly, after a few seasons of dodging angry monks and pitchfork-wielding peasants, the idea of sitting down to negotiate prices with a merchant in a bustling riverside market, even if you have to learn a few words of a completely foreign language, starts to sound quite appealing. Plus, less mud? Probably. The goods flowing from the East weren't just luxuries for the elite back home, they were currency. Silver dirhams from the Abbasid Caliphate, with their intricate Arabic script, became a standardized form of wealth. These weren't just coins, they were tangible proof of connection to a richer world. They could be melted down and refashioned into jewelry, used to buy land, or traded for goods closer to home. The sheer volume of Eastern silver flowing into Scandinavia and the Baltic region during the Viking Age is staggering. Hoards containing thousands of these coins have been found, far outweighing the amount of Western silver from raiding. This is a mainstream historical fact. The vast majority of silver found in Viking Age hoards in Scandinavia and the Baltic originated from the Islamic world, primarily via the Eastern trade routes. It underscores just how central this Eastern connection was, not just for luxury goods, but for the very foundation of their economy. But getting to this source of wealth? That's the boring part. It requires preparation on a scale far beyond packing a longship for a quick trip across the North Sea. You need boats designed not for ocean waves, but for rivers, shallower draft, perhaps, or adaptable for both rowing and sailing on sometimes narrow, winding waterways. You need supplies for a journey that could last months, maybe even years. You need knowledge of the routes, the portages, the people you'll encounter, the languages, or at least the universal language of pointing at things and showing bags of silver. It's less about brute force and more about logistics and diplomacy. You're not just a warrior anymore, you're a businessman, a diplomat, and a seasoned traveler all rolled into one. Imagine trying to explain your inventory to a merchant who speaks a language you've never even heard of, using only gestures and the universal human desire for shiny things. It adds a whole new layer of complexity to your quarterly earnings report. The eastern routes weren't empty highways waiting for Viking traffic. They were already ancient arteries of trade, used by various peoples for centuries. The Vikings, or the Russ as they became known in the East, were essentially muscling in on existing networks, adapting them, and expanding their reach. They weren't discovering new paths so much as navigating and dominating established ones. This meant dealing with the people already living along these rivers, Finno-Ugric tribes, various Slavic groups, and most importantly, powerful polities like the Khazars and the Volga Bulgars, who controlled key points along the routes and levied tolls, ancient taxes, basically, proof that bureaucracy is older than dirt. This journey eastward wasn't a single, unified Viking expedition. It was a series of ventures, growing in scale and ambition over time. Early trips might have been tentative probes, feeling out the routes, testing the waters, literally and metaphorically. As knowledge grew and success stories filtered back, more people were drawn to the potential. It became a self-reinforcing cycle. More trade meant more wealth, which funded more expeditions, which brought back more goods and knowledge. It was the original network effect, but instead of social media likes, you were collecting silver dirhams and exotic furs. A quirky tidbit about the early Eastern trade? Some historians suggest that the demand for specific goods from the north, like high-quality furs, sable, ermine, beaver, and slaves, often captives from Slavic or Baltic tribes, was a major driver for establishing these routes. The wealthy elites of the Islamic Caliphate and the Byzantine Empire had an insatiable appetite for these luxury items, which were scarce or non-existent in their own lands. So, while the Vikings were after silver and silks, the Easterners were often after warm coats and, well, people. It's a less glamorous aspect of the trade, but historically significant. Historians still argue whether the primary initial motivation for these eastern voyages was trade, exploration, or the search for tribute and resources beyond what could be easily raided in the West. Was it driven by surplus population, political ambition, or simply the allure of the unknown and the potential for riches? The truth is likely a complex mix of all these factors, varying by individual, group, and time period. Some might have been seeking pure profit, others adventure, others perhaps fleeing difficult circumstances back home. The routes themselves were dynamic, shifting over time based on political stability, changing demand, and the navigability of the rivers. It was a system that required constant adaptation and a willingness to face the unknown around every bend in the river. And that's where you are now. You've heard the call, you've decided to look east. You've mentally prepared for the long haul, the slow grind of river travel, the complex negotiations instead of the quick clash of steel. You're leaving the familiar coast behind, turning your back on the crashing waves of the open sea, and setting your sights on the vast, intricate network of waterways that snake across the heart of Eastern Europe. The journey begins not with a dramatic battle cry, but with the quiet dip of oars into fresh water, the gentle current beginning to carry you inland, deeper and deeper into the continent, towards a sea you've only heard whispered tales about. It's a long, slow drift into the heart of the land, perfect for letting your mind wander, and perhaps, for letting yourself drift off to sleep. So, you've heard the whispers, felt the pull, and made the decision. You're heading east, not for plunder on the waves, but for profit on the rivers. You're standing on the shores of the Baltic, maybe somewhere near the eastern coast of what's now Sweden, or perhaps further east, in the region that would one day be called Finland or Estonia. Instead of turning your longship's prow towards the open, choppy North Sea, you're looking inland, towards the vast, dark forests, and the unseen network of waterways that promise passage deep into the continent. This isn't a quick sail, it's a commitment to a different kind of journey, one that begins by finding the right river mouth. Think of it like trying to find the entrance ramp to a hidden highway system that covers half a continent, except the signs are non-existent. The map is purely in rumor and fragmented knowledge, and the ramps are often just subtle breaks in the coastline leading into seemingly insignificant rivers. Your longship, while versatile, wasn't purpose-built for this. It's a boat designed to handle ocean swell and beach landings, not necessarily navigate narrow, winding channels or be hauled overland for miles. You quickly learn that adaptations are needed. Maybe you're traveling in smaller boats, or perhaps your longship is one of the shallower draft varieties. Regardless, the feeling is different. The salty tang of the open sea air is replaced by the smell of fresh water, damp earth, and dense pine forests. The endless horizon gives way to towering trees and riverbanks that press in close. Entering these river systems is like stepping into a different world. The Baltic Sea itself is just the antechamber. From its eastern shores, countless rivers flow inland. The most famous routes, the ones that would become the highways to the south and east, involved navigating rivers like the Neva, which flows from Lake Ladoga into the Gulf of Finland. From Lake Ladoga, you'd enter the Folkhof River, heading south towards Lake Ilmen and the nascent settlement that would grow into the important city of Novgorod. This sequence of lakes and rivers forms a crucial part of the northern section of the main route towards the Dnieper and eventually the Black Sea, or towards the Volga and the Caspian. Another potential entry was via the western Dvina, which offered a route further south, requiring different portages. The initial challenge isn't just navigation, it's orientation. You're not following coastal landmarks anymore. You're relying on the flow of the water, the position of the sun, and the guidance of anyone you can find who knows the way, whether they are fellow Norse travelers who have made the journey before, or local inhabitants who have navigated these waters for generations. It's a complex puzzle of following rivers upstream, sometimes against a strong current, sometimes downstream with it, identifying where one river system ends and another begins, and knowing where to pull your boat out of the water to carry it overland to the next navigable waterway. It's less like sailing and more like a very long, very wet, multi-stage hike with a boat for luggage. The sheer scale of these river networks is hard to overstate. Eastern Europe is crisscrossed by thousands of miles of interconnected rivers and lakes. The Dnieper flows roughly south to the Black Sea, the Volga snakes southeast to the Caspian, and countless smaller rivers link them together or provide alternative paths. Mastering these routes requires incredible patience and local knowledge. You can easily get lost in the maze of tributaries, ending up in a dead-end lake or a river that flows in the wrong direction. It's the kind of logistical nightmare that would give a modern-day shipping company's CEO an anxiety attack. Imagine trying to deliver a container of goods from Stockholm to Tehran using only kayaks and a hand-drawn map you bought from a guy who might have been there once. One mainstream historical fact about this initial phase is that the earliest significant Viking presence recorded deep within Eastern Europe is often associated with trading posts or fortified settlements established at strategic points along these river routes, such as Ladoga, Aldija, on the Folkhof River or Holmgard, Novgorod, on Lake Ilmen. These weren't just temporary camps, they show a commitment to controlling key nodes in the network, providing safe havens, places to resupply, and bases for further exploration and trade. They were the distribution centers and logistics hubs of the Viking Age Eastern trade. The people encountered in these northern river regions were diverse. Finno-Ugric tribes inhabited the forests and lakes, skilled in trapping furs which were a valuable commodity for trade. Various Slavic groups were also present, living in scattered settlements along the rivers. Your interactions with them could vary wildly, sometimes trading partners, sometimes sources of tribute, sometimes outright hostile. You had to be constantly aware of who controlled which stretch of river and what their disposition was towards outsiders with large boats and a penchant for silver. It's a bit like driving through different states and having to figure out if the local police are friendly or if you're going to get pulled over just for looking like you're from out of town. A quirky tidbit from this early period involves the names the Rus used for these rivers and places. While Arabic and Byzantine sources give us names like Nar al-Rus, River of the Rus for the Volga, or Nar al-Dnieper, River of the Dnieper, The Rus themselves had their own names, often derived from Old Norse or local languages. The rapids on the Dnieper, for instance, were given descriptive Old Norse names that were recorded by the Byzantine Emperor Constantine's 7 Porphyrogenitos in the 10th century, providing a unique linguistic window into their journey. It's like finding out the truck drivers on Route 66 had their own secret code names for every diner and truck stop. Historians still argue whether the initial push into these river systems was primarily driven by the search for furs and slaves in the north, or whether the goal was always to reach the wealthy markets of the south and east. Were these northern regions the destination themselves in the beginning, or just a necessary passage? The truth is likely that the motivations evolved over time. Early ventures might have been focused on exploiting the resources of the Baltic hinterland, with the realization that the rivers continued much further south, opening up new, more lucrative possibilities. The rivers weren't just routes through these lands, they were routes to the resources and people living along them. So, you're on the river now. The rhythm of the oars is constant, a soft, repetitive sound broken only by the creak of the boat, the calls of birds, or the rustle of wind in the trees. The current is sometimes your friend, sometimes your enemy. You're learning to read the water, to spot shallows, to anticipate bends. The banks drift by, endless walls of green and brown. This is the reality of the journey, long stretches of monotonous effort punctuated by moments of intense focus or sudden danger. It's not the dramatic clash of shields, it's the quiet, persistent grind of moving forward, one oar stroke, 1 mile, one river bend at a time. You're deep inland now, the open sea a distant memory, replaced by the winding, intricate paths of fresh water that lead you further and further into the heart of the continent, towards a destiny you can only imagine. It's a slow, steady progress, the kind that lulls the mind. You've navigated the northern lakes and rivers, perhaps making your way south from Lake Ilmen, following the Fokhof, or finding another path further west. Now, the landscape is subtly changing. The dense northern forests might be giving way to mixed woodlands, and the rivers, while still wide and powerful in places, are beginning to hint at greater challenges ahead. You're entering the vast watershed of the Dnieper River, one of the great arteries of Eastern Europe, flowing south through lands that would eventually become modern-day Belarus and Ukraine, emptying into the Black Sea. This is a primary path towards the south, a route that promises connection to the riches of the Byzantine Empire and, from there, access to the wider trade networks leading east. Getting onto the Dnieper itself might involve yet another portage, a significant one depending on which northern route you took. If you came via the Fokhof and Lake Ilmen, you'd likely need to haul your boats and goods overland from the upper reaches of rivers flowing south towards the Dnieper basin. This isn't a short stroll, it's a multi-day, back-breaking effort. Imagine trying to move a small house, made of wood and filled with all your worldly possessions, across uneven terrain, through forests, maybe even over hills. You're not just carrying it, you're dragging it on rollers, pushing, pulling, sweating, probably inventing new curse words in Old Norse. It's the kind of physical exertion that leaves your muscles aching for days, the perfect recipe for a deep, exhausted sleep. Once you're on the Dnieper itself, the sheer scale of the river becomes apparent. It's a mighty waterway, sometimes calm and broad, allowing for relatively easy sailing or rowing, and at other times, fast-flowing and treacherous. But the real test of the Dnieper route lies in its southern section, particularly a series of rapids that block the path towards the Black Sea. These aren't just minor riffles, they are significant obstacles, stretches of turbulent water, rocks, and narrow channels that make navigation incredibly dangerous, if not impossible, especially with loaded trading vessels. There were, famously, 7 major rapids on the Dnieper, each with its own name, recorded for posterity by the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII in the 10th century, who noted both their Slavic and Rus names. The Rus names, like Eofor, ever-boiling, or Leanti, danger, or perhaps related to violent, give you a pretty clear idea of the experience. Navigating these required immense skill, courage, and often, a lot of manpower. In some cases, smaller boats might be carefully lowered through the rapids, guided by ropes from the shore. But for larger vessels, or when the water levels were too high or too low, there was only one option: portage. Again. This Dnieper portage, bypassing the rapids, was perhaps the most notorious of all the overland hauls on the eastern routes. It involved unloading everything from the boats, carrying the goods and supplies along the riverbank for miles, and then hauling the empty vessels themselves. The path was rough, the terrain uneven, and the threat of attack ever present. Imagine doing this not once, but multiple times for each set of rapids. It was a logistical and physical nightmare, a choke point on the route where travelers were most vulnerable and most exhausted. It's the historical equivalent of trying to get a fully loaded semi-truck through a muddy obstacle course while simultaneously fending off highway bandits. While struggling with the rapids and portages, you were also constantly interacting with the local populations. The Dnieper Valley was inhabited by various Slavic tribes, some relatively independent, others gradually falling under the influence of the Rus themselves, particularly as power coalesced around centers like Kiev, Konigar to the Rus. Your relationship with these groups determined whether your journey was relatively smooth or fraught with danger. Sometimes you could trade for supplies or guides. Other times you faced hostility, demands for tribute, or outright attacks. Remember, you're a foreigner passing through their lands, often well-armed and seeking to extract wealth. It's a delicate balance between projecting strength and attempting diplomacy. One mainstream historical fact is that the Rus established a major power center at Kiev on the Dnieper. This city grew from a trading post to the capital of a powerful polity, Kievan Rus, which came to dominate large sections of the Dnieper route and control the flow of goods and people. Kiev's strategic location, just upstream from the rapids, made it a crucial hub where northern goods met southern markets, and where the Rus could consolidate their power and resources. It was their main base of operations on the southern route, like the central depot for their cross-continental delivery service. The threat of hostile tribes, particularly nomadic groups like the Pecheneg who controlled the steppes south of the rapids, was a constant danger. Once past the rapids, the river flowed through open country towards the Black Sea, making travelers exposed. Arab chroniclers described the Rus traders carrying weapons and being ready for a fight after navigating the rapids, expecting attacks from the Pecheneg who lurked along the lower Dnieper, waiting to ambush vulnerable caravans. It was like finally getting your truck out of the mud pit, only to realize you're now driving through bandit country. A quirky tidbit related to the Dnieper rapids comes from those same descriptions by Constantine VII. He notes the Rus performed certain rituals before attempting the rapids, sacrificing animals, sometimes even birds, to propitiate the gods or spirits of the river, seeking safe passage. This shows a blend of practical caution, relying on skill and strength, mixed with traditional beliefs and attempts to gain supernatural favor for a perilous undertaking. It's a reminder that even these pragmatic traders were people of their time, navigating a world full of unseen forces as well as very tangible dangers. Historians still argue whether the Rus who controlled Kiev and the Dnieper route were primarily of Scandinavian origin who assimilated with local Slavic populations, or whether they were already a mixed group from the outset, or even local elites who adopted the Rus identity associated with the profitable trade networks. The exact nature of the relationship between the Scandinavian traders and the emerging Kievan Rus state, and the degree of their ethnic identity over time, remains a complex and debated topic. So, you've faced the river's fury, hauled your boats and goods around the roaring rapids, and navigated the complex relationships with the peoples along the banks. You've pushed through exhaustion, battled the elements, and perhaps fended off attacks. The Dnieper has tested you physically and mentally. But now, finally, the river broadens, the current slows, and the air begins to carry the faint scent of salt, different from the fresh water you've known for so long. You're nearing the end of the Dnieper's long course, the vast expanse of the Black Sea opening before you. It's a moment of relief, of accomplishment, but also a transition. The river journey is almost over, but the next stage, the sea voyage to the glittering cities of the Byzantine Empire, and the potential continuation further east, is about to begin. You've made it through the heartland, the long, slow grind is paying off, and the promise of distant markets is closer than ever. The steady flow of the wide river now carries you towards the sea, a gentle rocking motion perfect for easing your mind. So, you've made it through the Dnieper Rapids, a test of strength and endurance that would make a modern marathon runner weep. The wide river carries you towards the shimmering expanse of the Black Sea, and for a moment, you might think the hardest part is over. You can almost taste the salt. Picture the bustling markets of Constantinople, Miklagard, the jewel of the Byzantine Empire, a major destination for goods flowing down the Dnieper. But remember the goal? The Caspian Sea. While the Black Sea offers immense opportunities and connects you to the Byzantine world, reaching the distant Caspian requires a different path, or rather, a different branch of this vast river highway system. This is where you encounter the most significant power brokers on the eastern routes, the Khazars. Imagine them as the ancient world's version of a major border control agency and toll road operator, but with their own army and a capital city built on an island in the middle of a river. The Khazar Khaganate was a powerful Turkic empire that, at its peak, controlled vast territories stretching across the southern Russian steppes, the lower Volga, and parts of the Crimea. They didn't just use the river roads. They controlled critical junctures, acting as formidable gatekeepers for anyone wanting to pass through their domain on the way to the rich markets further east and south. Getting to the Khazar-controlled heartlands usually meant taking the Volga route. This involves navigating south from the northern river systems, not towards the Dnieper's headwaters, but towards those that fed into the mighty Volga. This river, the longest in Europe, flows southeast, a colossal artery winding its way towards the Caspian Sea. And right at its mouth, strategically positioned to control all river traffic, was the Khazar capital, Itil. Reaching Itil meant traversing thousands of miles of the Volga, passing through lands inhabited by various peoples who paid tribute, or were subject to the Khazars. The Khazars' power was based largely on their control of trade. They levied tolls on goods passing through their territory, taxed the merchants, and provided a degree of security, for a price, of course, on the routes they controlled. For the Rus traders heading towards the Caspian, dealing with the Khazars wasn't optional, it was essential. You couldn't just sneak past Itil. It was a major city, a hub of activity, and the Khazars kept a close eye on who came and went, and more importantly, what they were carrying. Think of it as having to pass through customs at a major international airport, except instead of scanning your bags, they're counting your furs and silver, and the officials are heavily armed warriors. Your interactions with the Khazars would involve negotiation, diplomacy, and payment. Arab chroniclers who visited the Khazar lands described the Rus traders arriving at Itil, having to report to Khazar officials, and paying a significant portion of their goods, often 10% or more, as a toll. This was the price of admission to the Caspian trade network. While frustrating, paying the toll was often preferable to trying to fight your way through or find a bypass that likely didn't exist or was even more perilous. It was a necessary cost of doing business in this ancient, complex economy. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Khazars exacted tolls and taxes on the Rus traders using the Volga route, and this control over trade was a major source of their wealth and power. Life within Khazar territory, particularly at a major hub like Itil, would have been a sensory overload after weeks or months on the quiet rivers. Itil was described as a large, multi-ethnic, multi-religious city. It wasn't just Khazars and Rus. There were Muslims, Jews, Christians, and people from various Turkic and Slavic tribes, all drawn by the opportunities of trade. The air would be filled with the smells of different cuisines, the sounds of countless languages, and the sight of goods from across Eurasia, silks from Byzantium, spices from the east, furs from the north, slaves from captured tribes, and of course, silver flowing in from the Caliphate. It was a true melting pot, a cosmopolitan center unlike anything you'd have seen back in Scandinavia. A quirky tidbit about the Khazars is the historical debate and mystery surrounding their ruling elite's conversion to Judaism sometime between the 8th and 9th centuries. While the general population practiced various religions, including Tengriism, a Turkic religion, Islam, and Christianity, contemporary sources suggest the Khagan and the ruling aristocracy adopted Judaism. The reasons and the extent of this conversion are still debated, but it made the Khazar Khaganate a unique political entity in the region, sandwiched between the Christian Byzantine Empire and the Muslim caliphates, and it likely influenced their diplomatic and trade relationships. Imagine arriving at a major trading city and finding out the people in charge follow a religion you've only vaguely heard whispers about, adding another layer of complexity to your business dealings. Historians still argue about the exact nature of the relationship between the Rus and the Khazars. Were the early Rus settlements in Eastern Europe, like those around Novgorod or Kiev, initially tributaries of the Khazars, paying them tribute before eventually overthrowing their dominance? Or was the relationship more one of independent trading partners, with the Rus simply paying tolls for passage through Khazar territory? The degree of Khazar political control over the Rus and the timeline of its decline remain subjects of scholarly debate, complicated by the often biased nature of the available sources. Dealing with the Khazars wasn't just about paying tolls, it was also about navigating their political landscape and respecting their rules. They were a powerful military force, capable of protecting their trade routes, but also of crushing anyone who defied them. For the Rus, maintaining a working relationship, even if it involved significant payments, was crucial for accessing the lucrative markets of the Caspian region. It was a delicate dance between asserting their own presence and power on the rivers and acknowledging the Khazars' authority over the territories they controlled. You had to be tough enough to defend yourself, but smart enough to know when to pay up and play by their rules. So, you've paid your dues, navigated the currents of Khazar politics and economics, and perhaps spent some time trading in the bustling markets of Itil, exchanging your northern goods for eastern treasures. The Khazar gatekeepers have granted you passage, or perhaps you've asserted your right to pass through force or negotiation depending on the specific time period and circumstances. You've left the Dnieper behind, committed now to the southeastern path of the Volga. The river is vast, the journey ahead is still immense, but the Khazar hurdle, a major checkpoint on the way to the Caspian, is behind you. The flow of the great river carries you forward, deeper into the heart of the continent, towards the sea you seek. It's a vast, slow journey, the rhythmic dip of oars and the gentle current a steady lull. You've navigated the complex political currents controlled by the Khazars, understanding that they hold the key to the richest markets in the east, particularly those accessible via the Caspian Sea. The Dnieper route leads south to the Black Sea and the Byzantine Empire, a rich prize in itself, and certainly a path many Rus traders took. But your gaze, and the promise of even greater wealth, is fixed further east. You've committed to the Volga route, the great river highway that snakes southeast across the vast Eurasian plain towards that unexpected inland sea. This decision means turning away from the Dnieper's southern flow and finding the connections that link the northern river systems to the colossal Volga basin. The transition from the northern rivers, the ones that might eventually lead to the Dnieper or the Baltic, to the Volga is not a simple matter of turning a corner. Eastern Europe is a vast, relatively flat landscape, but the river systems are distinct watersheds. Getting from one to another often means finding the points where their headwaters or tributaries come closest, separated by only a relatively short stretch of land. These are the crucial portages, the overland links that connect seemingly disparate river networks into one grand, if arduous, system. Think of it as finding the secret backroads that connect one major highway to another, except the backroads are muddy trails through dense forests, and you have to carry your car. If you were coming from the region south of Lake Ilmen, having traveled down the Fokhof, you might follow rivers flowing eastward, like the Lovat or the Msta, pushing upstream against the current. These rivers, while significant, are just stepping stones. The goal is to reach the divide. The high ground, though high, is relative in this landscape, that separates the rivers flowing north or west from those flowing south and east into the Volga. This divide, often just a few miles wide, requires yet another portage, pulling your boats, your goods, your very livelihood out of the water and dragging it overland to the headwaters of a river that flows in the opposite direction. This portage, or series of portages, is physically demanding work. The boats, while perhaps smaller or modified for river travel compared to ocean-going longships, are still heavy. The goods are bulky, furs, honey, wax, slaves. You're moving everything manually, using rollers, ropes, and sheer muscle power. The trails are rough, often requiring you to cut through brush or navigate around obstacles. It's slow, exhausting, and leaves you vulnerable. This is the mundane reality of the Eastern trade, long periods of relentless physical labor interspersed with rowing or sailing. It's definitely not the stuff of epic sagas, unless the saga is titled The Ballad of the Aching Back and the Endless Mud. Once you've successfully crossed the divide and launched your boats into the headwaters of a river flowing towards the Volga, the current becomes your friend, at least for a while. You might find yourself on a tributary like the Sheksna, the Oka, or the Tvertsa, gradually making your way towards the main artery. As you travel downstream, the river grows wider, the flow stronger. The landscape changes again, the dense northern forests giving way to broader valleys and perhaps more open country, though forests are never far away. This is the approach to the mighty Volga, a river on a scale you might not have fully comprehended until you see it. The Volga is immense. It stretches for over 2,000 miles, draining a vast portion of Eastern Europe before emptying into the Caspian Sea. As you transition onto its main course, perhaps near a place like Yaroslavl or Nizhny Novgorod, sites of later cities, but important river junctions even in the Viking Age, you join a much larger flow of traffic. This isn't just a river, it's a superhighway of the ancient world, carrying goods and people across thousands of miles. The journey down the Volga is a commitment of months, navigating its bends, its varying currents, and its different sections, each with its own character and challenges. Along the upper and middle stretches of the Volga, before you reach the core territories of the Khazars in the south, you encounter a different array of peoples. These are various Finno-Ugric and Turkic tribes, including groups like the Maria, Muroma, Burtas, and Mordvins. Like the Slavic tribes along the Dnieper, your interactions with them are crucial. They inhabit the lands along the river, control access to local resources, and can be potential trading partners or dangerous adversaries. They might demand tribute for passage, offer goods like furs or local crafts, or simply try to ambush your boats. You have to be constantly vigilant, ready to trade or fight as the situation demands. One mainstream historical fact is that the Rus established trading posts and settlements along the upper Volga and its tributaries, just as they did further north and on the Dnieper. Sites like Rostov, Suzdal, and later Yaroslavl and Nizhny Novgorod grew partly due to their location on or near the Volga route. These settlements served as bases for trade, places to gather goods from the surrounding regions, especially furs, and safe havens for travelers on the long journey downriver. They were like the rest stops and distribution centers on the Volga highway. Life on the Volga is a routine of rowing when the wind is against you or absent, sailing when the wind is fair, and camping on the riverbanks at night. You're constantly exposed to the elements: sun, rain, wind, biting insects. The diet is likely monotonous, based on preserved foods supplemented by whatever you can hunt, fish, or trade for along the way. Security is a constant concern. You need to be able to defend your boats and your goods from raiders, whether they are local tribes or other groups of opportunistic bandits. It's a test of resilience, patience, and the ability to endure long stretches of sheer, unadulterated boredom, broken by moments of intense activity or danger. A quirky tidbit from the Volga route involves the goods sought from the peoples living along its upper and middle reaches. While silver and silks were the ultimate goal in the south, the northern Volga region was rich in high-quality furs: sable, ermine, fox, beaver. These furs were highly prized in the markets of the south and east and were a primary commodity the Rus acquired in the north to trade for silver and other luxuries further down the river. So, the early stages of the Volga journey were often about accumulating a valuable cargo of pelts gathered from the forests bordering the river. Imagine your cargo manifest listing: 1,000 beaver pelts, slightly damp. Historians still argue about the extent to which the Rus controlled the upper and middle Volga routes versus simply using them and interacting with the existing populations. Were the early Rus settlements in this region primarily trading enclaves, military outposts asserting dominance, or centers of a mixed population that gradually integrated with local Slavic and Finno-Ugric groups? The degree of Rus political authority versus their role as simply merchants and raiders in these northern Volga regions remains a subject of scholarly debate, with different interpretations of archaeological evidence and written sources. So, you've successfully made the transition, navigating the divides and launching onto the vast Volga. The river carries you southeast, a relentless, powerful force drawing you deeper into the heart of the continent. You're now fully committed to the eastern path, leaving the Dnieper and the Black Sea behind. The journey ahead is still immense, thousands of miles of river winding through lands inhabited by peoples you barely understand. But with every bend in the river, you're getting closer to the fabled markets of the Caspian, the source of unimaginable wealth. The rhythm of the river, the steady dip of oars, the endless banks drifting by, it's a hypnotic repetition, perfect for letting your thoughts drift. So, you've successfully launched your boat onto the vast, brown expanse of the Volga. The current is noticeable now, pulling you gently, relentlessly southeast. The river here isn't the intimate, winding streams of the north, nor the sometimes treacherous, sometimes rapid-filled Dnieper. The Volga is a behemoth, a liquid highway stretching further than you can comprehend, a seemingly endless ribbon of water flowing through a world that feels increasingly alien. The journey down this river isn't a sprint, it's a marathon, a test of endurance measured not in miles, but in weeks and months. Life on the Volga settles into a rhythm dictated by the river itself and the rising and setting of the sun. Your days are long and physically demanding. If the wind is fair and blowing from the north or west, you might be able to hoist a sail and glide along, the water whispering past the hull. This is the ideal scenario, a chance to rest your arms, skim the riverbanks, and maybe even catch a fish or two. But more often than not, the wind is unhelpful, or the river bends too sharply for sailing, or you're pushing upstream on a tributary trying to reach the main current. In these cases, it's back to the oars. Rowing on the Volga is a monotonous, repetitive task. Dip, pull, recover. Dip, pull, recover. Hour after hour, day after day. Your muscles ache, your hands grow calloused, and your mind drifts into a state of semi-hypnosis induced by the endless repetition and the gentle rocking of the boat. The riverbanks drift by slowly, sometimes dense forests, sometimes more open scrubland, sometimes low, marshy areas buzzing with insects. You see the same trees, the same types of bushes, the same stretch of water unfolding before you, only to be replaced by another, almost identical stretch. It's the kind of activity that is profoundly undramatic, perfect for lulling you into a state of deep relaxation, or perhaps just profound boredom. Imagine your fitness tracker just showing, rowing 8 hours, every single day for 6 months. Peak performance, zero excitement. Nights are spent camping on the riverbanks. You pull your boats ashore, secure them, and set up a temporary camp. Fires are lit for warmth and cooking, and for keeping away wild animals or potential human threats. Security is paramount. You're traveling through lands where the inhabitants might be curious, wary, or outright hostile. Watches are kept, and weapons are always close at hand. Sleep comes hard at first, alert to every snap of a twig or rustle in the bushes, but eventually, exhaustion wins, and you sleep the deep, heavy sleep of physical depletion, lulled by the sounds of the river and the crackling fire. Your diet on the journey is, shall we say, functional rather than gourmet. It consists largely of preserved foods brought from home, dried meat, fish, grains, maybe some hardtack, ancient equivalent of a survival biscuit. You supplement this with whatever you can acquire along the way, fish caught in the river, game hunted in the forests, or provisions traded from local populations. Imagine trying to maintain a balanced diet when your main options are smoked herring and whatever small, suspicious-looking animal you manage to snare. A Michelin star is definitely not in your future. The sheer scale of the journey means you are entirely self-reliant for long stretches. Any repairs to the boat, any medical needs, a sprained ankle from a portage, an infected cut, any resupply of basic necessities, it's all on you and your companions. You become intimately familiar with your boat, its quirks and needs. You learn to patch leaks, mend sails, and repair oars with whatever materials are available. It's a constant process of problem-solving and improvisation, a practical education far removed from the comforts of a settled life. It's like being on a never-ending road trip with no mechanics, no spare parts store, and the nearest gas station is several weeks away and might try to rob you. One mainstream historical fact about life on the Volga route is the importance of trading posts and fortified settlements established by the Rus and other groups along its course. While vast stretches of the river were wilderness, key locations served as places for rest, resupply, trade, and defense. These settlements, like those mentioned earlier, e.g., Rostov, later Yaroslavl, became crucial nodes in the network, facilitating the movement of goods and people and providing a degree of safety in an often dangerous environment. They were like the truck stops and distribution centers of the Volga Highway, albeit much more rudimentary and requiring significant effort to establish and maintain. Encountering other travelers on the Volga was not uncommon, though the river is so vast that you could go for days without seeing another soul. You might pass other Rus boats heading in either direction, sharing news and information. You might encounter merchants from other groups, Finno-Ugric traders, Bulgar merchants, or even agents of the Khazars or southern powers further downstream. These encounters could be opportunities for trade or sources of potential conflict, requiring careful assessment of intentions. It was a bit like meeting other travelers on a deserted highway. Are they friendly, or are they about to ask you for directions, followed by all your silver? A quirky tidbit related to the Volga journey comes from descriptions by Arab travelers, like Ibn Fadlan, who encountered the Rus on the river in the 10th century. He describes their appearance, their customs, and even their hygiene, or lack thereof, by his standards, painting a vivid, if sometimes unflattering, picture of these northern traders. He notes their large, muscular builds, their often unwashed clothing, and their practice of communal washing in a single basin, which he found particularly repulsive. It's a reminder that cultural differences were as much a part of the journey as the physical obstacles, and that your personal grooming habits might be judged by future historians. Historians still argue about the exact composition of the groups traveling the Volga route. While often referred to collectively as Rus, were they exclusively people of Scandinavian origin, or were they already ethnically mixed groups, incorporating Slavic and Finno-Ugric individuals? To what extent did these travelers integrate with or dominate the local populations along the riverbanks, and how did the identity of Rus evolve from potentially an ethnic label to a political one associated with the emerging polities in Eastern Europe? The degree of Scandinavian versus local influence in the culture and leadership of the Rus on the Volga remains a complex and debated topic. The journey down the Volga is a test of mental fortitude as much as physical strength. The sheer scale, the monotony, the constant low-level vigilance required, it wears you down. But the promise of what lies at the end of the river, the glittering markets of the south, the wealth of the Caspian trade, is what keeps you going. Each bend in the river, each day of rowing, each night spent under the stars on the riverbank brings you closer to that goal. The vastness of the landscape, the endless flow of the water, the quiet rhythm of the journey, it all combines into a profound sense of forward motion, a slow, steady drift towards a distant, fabled sea. It's a journey that demands patience and perseverance, perfect for letting your thoughts unwind and drift away. The endless rhythm of the Volga continues, the banks a blur of green and brown, the water an unchanging expanse before you. But this vast river isn't empty. It's a highway, and highways have traffic, even in the 9th and 10th centuries. After days or weeks of relative solitude, the signs of human habitation become more frequent. Smoke rising from the trees, clearings on the riverbank, maybe even rudimentary docks or clusters of dwellings. You are passing through the lands of numerous peoples, each with their own language, customs, and relationship to this great river and the trade that flows along it. Your journey down the Volga brings you into contact with a mosaic of cultures. In the upper and middle reaches, you've already begun to encounter Finno-Ugric tribes like the Meria, Muroma, and Mordvins, inhabitants of the dense forests and river valleys. As you move further south, you meet Turkic groups like the Burtas and, crucially, the Volga Bulgars. These weren't just scattered settlements. They were established societies, often with their own political structures and, in the case of the Bulgars, a major urban center. Interacting with them wasn't always easy, but it was essential. Think of it as a series of border crossings and business meetings spread out over thousands of miles. Each group controls a stretch of the river, or has access to valuable resources from the surrounding land. Your approach is always cautious. Are they friendly? Will they trade? Will they demand tribute? Or are they looking for an opportunity to ambush and plunder? Your reputation, built on previous journeys and word of mouth, which traveled surprisingly fast along these routes, could precede you. Were you known as fair traders or as dangerous raiders? Your interactions would depend heavily on this, and on the specific political climate at the time. Trade was the primary reason you were here, and the peoples along the Volga had goods the southern markets craved, and which you could acquire to trade for silver and silks. Furs, especially high-quality pelts like sable, ermine, and beaver, were a major commodity from the northern forests. Honey and wax, essential for everything from sweetening food to making candles and seals, were also valuable. And regrettably, slaves, often captives taken from other tribes or even from within their own societies, were a significant part of the trade flowing south. You would stop at settlements, negotiate prices, and exchange your own goods, perhaps weapons, tools, or goods acquired further north, for the products of the region. It required patience, cunning, and a surprising amount of linguistic improvisation. Imagine trying to haggle over the price of a beaver pelt using only hand gestures and the universal language of quinclinking. It adds a certain je-ne-sais quoi to international commerce. One of the most important encounters along the Volga route was with the Volga Bulgars. Situated around the confluence of the Volga and Kama rivers, their state, centered on the city of Bulgar, was a major power in the region and a crucial trading hub. They controlled access to the river system further south and east and had established extensive trading relationships with the Khazar Khaganate and the markets of Central Asia. For the Rus heading to the Caspian, stopping at Bulgar was often a necessity, a place to rest, resupply, and engage in large-scale trade before proceeding further downstream. It's a mainstream historical fact that the city of Bulgar on the Volga was a vital and powerful trading center encountered by the Rus on their journey east, comparable in importance to cities like Kiev or later Novgorod on other routes. The Khazars, whom we touched upon earlier, were the ultimate power brokers on the lower Volga. While you might encounter their influence earlier, their core territory and capital, Itil, were further south, near the Caspian Sea. Passing through their lands meant dealing with their authority, paying tolls, and navigating their complex, multi-ethnic society. Their control over the lower Volga was paramount, and they were not a group to be trifled with. Life among these diverse peoples wasn't just about trade and potential conflict. You were exposed to different ways of life, different beliefs, different foods. You might hear languages that sounded utterly foreign, see clothing and customs unlike anything you knew. It was a crash course in cultural diversity, conducted on the riverbanks. You might see the burial practices of one group, the religious rituals of another, the unique architecture of a third. It was a constant reminder that the world was far larger and more varied than the fjords of Scandinavia. A quirky tidbit about encountering these groups comes again from Ibn Fadlan's account of his journey up the Volga to the Bulgars. He describes the Rus arriving at Bulgar, setting up camp, and immediately engaging in trade. He also notes their practice of setting up large wooden idols or pillars near their camp, representing their gods, and offering sacrifices of food and drink to them before beginning their trade, asking for success and profit. This blend of pragmatic commerce and religious ritual, performed openly in a foreign land, offers a fascinating glimpse into their beliefs and practices while on the road. Imagine trying to close a major business deal today after publicly offering sacrifices to Odin in the company parking lot. Might raise a few eyebrows. Historians still argue about the extent of Rus' influence over the various Slavic, Finno-Ugric, and Turkic tribes they encountered along the river routes. Were they primarily traders and mercenaries, simply passing through and exploiting existing networks? Or did they exert significant political and military control, establishing dominance over these groups and extracting tribute, eventually leading to the formation of polities like Kievan Rus and other principalities? The nature of the relationship, whether it was primarily economic, military, or a complex mix, varied by region and time period and remains a subject of scholarly debate, with interpretations often depending on which sources, Arabic, Byzantine, or later Rus chronicles, are given the most weight. Dealing with the peoples of the rivers required not just trading skill but also a keen understanding of local politics, a willingness to negotiate, and the ability to defend yourself and your goods when necessary. You were a guest, a merchant, and potentially a threat, all rolled into one, depending on who you were talking to and what their experiences with the Rus had been like in the past. It was a constant tightrope walk, balancing the need for profitable trade with the ever-present possibility of hostility. So you continue down the Volga, past the lands of one people, into the territory of another. The river is your constant companion, but the human landscape is ever-changing. You learn to read not just the currents, but the intentions in people's eyes. You trade, you negotiate, maybe sometimes you fight. Each encounter is a risk and an opportunity. But with every mile, with every interaction, you are moving closer to your ultimate destination, the fabled Caspian Sea, the gateway to the wealth of the East. The encounters along the river, the blend of commerce and caution, the sheer diversity of the people you meet, it adds layers to the journey, making the long, slow drift down the river a constant process of observation and adaptation, perfect for letting your mind wander and perhaps for easing into sleep. After weeks or months of the steady, monotonous rhythm of the river, the endless green and brown banks, and scattered encounters with various tribes, you start to see signs of something different. The river might widen, or the banks become more populated. You see more boats, larger boats, coming and going. Smoke plumes thicken on the horizon, and eventually, the shape of substantial buildings begins to emerge from the trees. You are approaching a major center, a node in this vast network, a place that represents a significant milestone on your journey, the city of Bulgar. Situated strategically near the confluence of the Volga and Kama rivers, the capital of the Volga Bulgars was, for a time, one of the most important trading cities in Eastern Europe. It wasn't a temporary camp or a small village, it was a substantial urban center, fortified, bustling, and cosmopolitan. For the Rus traders heading south and east, arriving at Bulgar was like pulling into a major port after a long ocean voyage. It was a place to resupply, repair boats, gather information, and most importantly, engage in large-scale trade before continuing the arduous journey down the lower Volga towards the Khazar lands and the Caspian Sea. Imagine stepping ashore after weeks or months on the river. The ground feels solid, perhaps a little too solid after the constant gentle rocking of the boat. The air is filled with a cacophony of sounds, the bleating of animals, the shouts of merchants in dozens of different languages, the clang of blacksmiths, the calls to prayer from the city's mosques, as the Volga Bulgars had adopted Islam. The smells are overwhelming after the clean air of the river, livestock, cooking fires, spices, tanning hides, and the general aroma of a large, busy city. It's a shock to the senses, a sudden plunge back into organized, complex human society after the relative solitude of the river journey. It's less peaceful river drift, and more ancient rush hour, but with more animal smells and fewer car horns. The city of Bulgar itself was a hub of activity, drawing merchants and goods from across Eurasia. From the north came the furs, honey, wax, and slaves brought by the Rus and other northern traders. From the south and east flowed silver, in the form of dirhams minted in the Abbasid Caliphate and other Islamic states, as well as silks from Byzantium and Central Asia, spices, jewelry, weapons, and manufactured goods. The city's markets were vast and diverse, a place where the products of the northern forests met the luxuries of the sophisticated empires of the south. It was a place where fortunes could be made, or lost, depending on your bargaining skills and the quality of your goods. For the Rus, Bulgar was a crucial trading partner and a gateway. While the Khazars controlled the lower Volga and access to the Caspian proper, the Bulgars controlled a vital section of the middle Volga and had established their own extensive trade networks reaching east into Central Asia. Trading in Bulgar allowed the Rus to exchange their northern commodities for the silver and other goods they desired, without having to go all the way to the Khazar capital of Itil or the Caspian coast for every transaction. It also served as a place to consolidate cargo, perhaps joining up with other Rus groups for added security on the dangerous journey further south. It was like a major distribution center where you could swap out your initial cargo for something more valuable before heading to the final destination. Dealing with the Volga Bulgars involved navigating their rules and regulations. As rulers of a settled state, they had established procedures for trade, likely involving taxes or fees on goods entering or leaving their city. While perhaps less imposing than the Khazars, the Bulgars were a powerful group, capable of enforcing their will. Your interactions with them would involve negotiation, perhaps presenting gifts to local officials, and adhering to the customs of their city. It was a formal process, far removed from the more informal, sometimes opportunistic trading that might occur with smaller tribes along the river. It's the difference between selling goods at a farmer's market and trying to get a product onto the shelves of a major international retailer. Both require salesmanship, but one involves a lot more paperwork, or the ancient equivalent thereof. One mainstream historical fact is that the city of Bulgar flourished from the 10th to the 13th centuries, becoming a major center of international trade and Islamic culture on the Volga. Its wealth was derived primarily from its control over the river trade routes, particularly the exchange of northern furs and slaves for southern silver and luxury goods. Accounts from travelers like Ibn Fadlan, who visited Bulgar in the early 10th century, provide valuable insights into the city's layout, its people, their customs, and the scale of the trade conducted there, confirming its status as a vital hub on the eastern routes. Life in Bulgar for a visiting Rus trader would have been a mix of intense commercial activity and cultural immersion. You'd spend your days in the markets, haggling, buying, and selling. Your nights might be spent in designated traders' quarters, socializing with fellow Rus and merchants from other lands, exchanging news and information about conditions further along the routes. You'd see the city's mosques, perhaps hear the calls to prayer, and observe the daily life of a settled, Islamic society, so different from the more nomadic or tribal groups you'd encountered further north, and certainly different from life back in Scandinavia. It was an education in the wider world, conducted through the lens of commerce. A quirky tidbit from Ibn Fadlan's account of the Rus in Bulgar. He describes their burial customs, noting that when a prominent man died, his companions would build a temporary structure and place him inside with his goods, food, and drink. If he had a female slave, she might be sacrificed and placed in the grave with him, along with animals. He gives a graphic description of a ship burial ritual he witnessed near Bulgar, complete with human sacrifice, which horrified him but provides a unique, albeit controversial, glimpse into certain Rus practices at the time. It's a stark reminder of the cultural gulf between the Rus and the more settled, Abrahamic societies of the south and east they traded with. Historians still argue about the exact nature of the relationship between the Rus and the Volga Bulgars. Were they primarily independent trading partners, mutually benefiting from the exchange of goods? Or did the relationship involve elements of tribute or political subservience at different times? The degree of Rus influence in the Bulgar state, and the extent to which the Bulgars were able to control or tax the Rus traders, remains a subject of scholarly debate, complicated by the limited and sometimes biased nature of the historical sources. Leaving Bulgar meant turning your gaze further south and east, towards the lower Volga and the territories controlled by the Khazars, the final major hurdle before the Caspian. You'd have restocked supplies, perhaps repaired your boats, and hopefully acquired a valuable cargo of silver and eastern goods by trading your northern commodities. The city's bustle fades behind you, replaced once again by the vast, flowing expanse of the Volga. But even though you've left the city, the physical challenges of the journey are far from over. The lower Volga is immense, and there are still significant obstacles between you and the Caspian Sea, obstacles that will once again require immense physical effort and determination. The relative comfort and civilization of Bulgar are behind you, and the long, slow grind of the river journey, punctuated by grueling portages, lies ahead. The steady current pulls you onward, a relentless force carrying you towards the next challenge. Leaving the bustling, relatively civilized hub of Bulgar behind you is a transition back to the raw, physical reality of the eastern routes. The city's sounds and smells fade as you continue down the vast Volga, but the river, despite its size, isn't always a smooth highway. Even on this mighty waterway, and certainly on the tributaries connecting river systems, there are obstacles. Rocks, shallows, changes in elevation, or the need to move from one river basin to another necessitate the most dreaded, yet unavoidable, part of the journey, the portage. You've already encountered portages multiple times on this incredible journey, hauling boats between northern lakes, crossing the divides to reach the Dnieper or the Volga headwaters, bypassing the Dnieper rapids. But the sheer scale of the vulgar route means these physical challenges are a recurring, defining feature of the experience. It's not just a minor inconvenience, it's a fundamental part of the travel, requiring immense effort from every person in your crew. Think of it as the world's most extreme, multi-stage triathlon, except instead of swimming, biking, and running, you're rowing, sailing, and hauling boats that weigh as much as a small elephant. Repeatedly. The process is always the same, always arduous. First, you have to find a suitable spot to pull the boats ashore. This might be a designated portage path, worn smooth by generations of use, or it might be a rough, muddy bank where you have to clear brush just to get started. Then, everything comes out of the boat. Every bale of fur, every sack of grain, every weapon, every tool, every piece of trade goods, every personal possession. This cargo has to be carried, piece by piece, along the overland path. You load yourself down, staggering under the weight, trudging through mud, over roots, maybe even up slight inclines. It's a long, slow, repetitive march, carrying the wealth you hope to exchange at your destination. Your shoulders ache, your back protests, and your legs feel like lead. It's the physical embodiment of delayed gratification. You are literally hauling your potential fortune on your back. Once the cargo is moved, the real work begins, moving the boat itself. These are not flimsy kayaks. Even riverboats are substantial vessels, built of heavy timber. To move them overland, you need rollers, logs or rounded pieces of wood placed beneath the keel. Then, with ropes and sheer manpower, you heave. You push, you pull, you strain, muscles burning, lungs heaving. Everyone works together, a coordinated effort of grunts, shouts, and the creak of wood on wood. You inch the boat forward, reposition the rollers as it moves past them, and repeat the process. It's painstakingly slow, exhausting work that requires every ounce of strength and cooperation. Imagine trying to move your shed across the lawn using only your friends and some fallen branches. Now imagine doing that for miles, through rough terrain, potentially multiple times on a single journey. The length of a portage could vary dramatically. Some might be relatively short, just a few hundred yards around a set of rapids or a shallow stretch. Others, connecting major river systems, could be miles long, taking days or even weeks to complete. The Dnieper Rapids portage, for example, was notorious for its length and difficulty. Crossing the watershed divides between major river basins often involved substantial overland hauls. During these times, the river, your usual highway, becomes an enemy, an impassable barrier that forces you onto land, the element you are least suited for with your heavy, waterborne vessels. While portaging, you are also at your most vulnerable. Your boats are out of the water, your goods are spread out along the trail, and your crew is exhausted and focused on the strenuous task at hand. This is when hostile groups, whether local tribes or opportunistic bandits, are most likely to attack. You have to maintain vigilance, posting guards while others work, ready to drop everything and fight to defend your cargo and your lives. It adds a layer of intense stress and potential danger to an already physically grueling task. It's like trying to change a flat tire on the side of a busy highway, except the traffic might be armed and actively trying to steal your spare. One mainstream historical fact is that the necessity of portages, parivoloka, in Slavic languages, drag, or haul, places in Old Norse, was a defining characteristic of the river routes of Eastern Europe, and overcoming these obstacles was crucial for connecting the Baltic Sea to the Black and Caspian Seas. These portage sites were well known and strategically important, sometimes protected by fortifications or settlements, and their difficulty significantly impacted the speed, cost, and danger of travel along the routes. The physical toll of these portages was immense. It wasn't just the immediate exhaustion, it was the cumulative effect of repeated strenuous effort over a long journey. Injuries were likely common: sprained ankles, strained backs, cuts, and bruises. The constant exposure to the elements, combined with physical depletion, would have made travelers susceptible to illness. This was not a journey for the weak or the faint of heart. It demanded incredible physical resilience and mental fortitude. A quirky tidbit related to portages comes from the sheer ingenuity sometimes employed. While rollers and ropes were standard, travelers might also construct temporary sledges or even use frozen rivers in winter as natural highways, though this came with its own set of extreme dangers. The ability to adapt and improvise was key to surviving these journeys, turning natural obstacles into passable routes through sheer willpower and practical engineering. Imagine building a makeshift sled out of tree branches and using it to drag your boat across the snow because the river is too shallow. Resourcefulness, Viking style. Historians still argue about the impact of portages on the volume and type of trade that flowed along these routes. Did the difficulty of these overland sections limit the size of the boats and the amount of cargo that could be transported? How did the presence and control of key portage sites influence the power dynamics between the Rus and the local populations or groups like the Khazars and Bulgars? The logistical challenges of the portages were so significant that they likely acted as a natural bottleneck, shaping the economics and politics of the entire river network, and the exact degree of their limiting effect remains a subject of scholarly debate. So you push and pull, sweat dripping into your eyes, muscles screaming in protest. The boat inches forward, a few feet at a time. The sound of wood scraping on wood, the grunts of effort, the rustle of leaves as you move through the undergrowth. These are the sounds of the portage. It is slow, unglamorous, and utterly exhausting. But with every foot gained, you are closer to the next stretch of navigable water, closer to continuing your journey, closer to your destination. The physical grind is relentless, wearing you down, but also forging a bond of shared hardship with your companions. The exhaustion is profound, the kind that seeps into your bones and promises a deep, dreamless sleep. You keep moving one step, one heave, one roller at a time, pushing forward towards the open water, towards the continuation of the journey, towards the distant, fabled sea. You've endured the relentless, physical demand of the portages, the endless heaving and hauling that left your muscles screaming and your body aching. You've settled back into the rhythm of the vast Volga, the current pulling you further south, the banks slowly changing from dense forests to more open, sometimes arid, landscapes. The air feels different, perhaps warmer, drier. The sunlight seems harsher. The journey has been long, stretching across months, maybe even a full year since you left the shores of the Baltic. You've traded, you've navigated, you've fought, you've hauled, you've endured. And now, finally, after thousands of miles of freshwater rivers, you sense a change. The Volga, already immense, seems to widen even further. The banks recede, becoming low and sometimes marshy, merging with a flat, featureless horizon. The river water itself might taste different, less purely fresh, perhaps hinting at something larger, something mineral. The bird life changes. You might see species you've never encountered before, birds associated with larger bodies of water, or even migratory species connecting distant lands. There's a sense of space opening up, a feeling that the long confinement of the riverbanks is finally coming to an end. And then you see it. Not a dramatic coastline with crashing waves and salty spray like the open ocean, but a vast, shimmering expanse of water that stretches to the horizon in every direction. It's flat, or maybe gently ruffled by a breeze, but undeniably immense. This is the Caspian Sea. The destination whispered about in the north, the fabled gateway to the riches of the east. It's a moment of profound relief, exhaustion, and perhaps a touch of bewilderment. You've traveled across a continent, down endless rivers, hauled your boat over land more times than you care to remember, all to reach an inland sea. No tides to speak of, no direct connection to the great oceans you know from the west. It's like expecting to find a palace at the end of a quest and instead finding a really, really big, slightly salty lake. Still impressive, but definitely not what someone used to the Atlantic might picture when you say sea. The arrival isn't necessarily at a dramatic cliff face or a sandy beach. Given that you've come down the Volga, your arrival is likely near the river's vast delta, a complex network of channels and marshes where the river finally gives up its freshwater identity and merges with the salty expanse. And right there, strategically positioned to control the flow of trade from the Volga onto the Caspian and vice versa, is the heartland of the Khazar Khaganate, and their capital city, Itil. Reaching the Caspian Sea via the Volga meant arriving in Khazar territory proper. You've already navigated their influence further north, perhaps paid tolls to their representatives. But arriving at the mouth of the Volga, near Itil, is entering the core of their power. This city was described by Arab chroniclers as being built on islands in the delta, connected by bridges, a major, bustling metropolis. It was the ultimate checkpoint on the Volga route, the place where the Rus traders came face to face with the full might and complexity of the Khazar state. The moment of arrival is less about dropping anchor in an empty bay and more about entering a busy, controlled zone. Khazar officials would be present, ready to assess your cargo, collect their tolls, remember that 10% or more we talked about, and ensure you adhered to their regulations. You've made it to the destination, but the business of trade, under the watchful eyes of powerful gatekeepers, is just beginning. It's like finally reaching your vacation resort after a long drive, only to find you have to go through a lengthy, heavily taxed customs inspection before you're allowed to check in. The sheer scale of the trade facilitated by reaching the Caspian Sea is hard to comprehend. From the Caspian, trade routes radiated out in every direction, south into Persia and the heartlands of the Abbasid Caliphate, east into Central Asia and along the Silk Road, connecting you to markets and goods from India and even China. The silver dirhams that were the lifeblood of the eastern trade primarily flowed from the vast mines of Central Asia, reaching the Caspian ports and then traveling north up the Volga. This was the source of the wealth that drew the Rus across a continent. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Caspian Sea served as the crucial gateway connecting the Volga route and northern Europe to the vast and wealthy markets of the Islamic world in Central Asia, with cities on its shores like Adal, Itil, Derbent, and Jurgen becoming major hubs for this transcontinental trade. Your boats, designed for rivers, might need adaptation for travel on the open, albeit inland sea, or perhaps you would transfer your goods to vessels more suited for Caspian travel. Trade would commence, exchanging your northern furs, slaves, honey, and wax for the coveted silver dirhams, silks, spices, jewelry, and other luxury goods from the south and east. This was the payoff for the long journey, the reason you endured the portages, the rapids, the mosquitoes, and the constant threat of attack. A quirky tidbit about reaching the Caspian relates to the types of ships used. While the river-adapted longships, or similar vessels, got the Rus to the Caspian, navigating the sea itself might have involved different boats. Arab sources sometimes refer to the Rus ships on the Caspian, and it's debated whether they used their own riverboats on the sea, built new, larger vessels suitable for the Caspian, or perhaps acquired or adapted ships from local Caspian peoples. The logistics of transitioning from river travel to sea travel on the Caspian, including potential changes in vessel type, adds another layer to the complexity of their operations. Imagine arriving at the coast after driving cross-country, only to realize you need a completely different type of vehicle to navigate the local terrain, and you have to figure out how to get one. Historians still argue about the extent of the Rus operations on the Caspian Sea itself. Did they merely trade at the major Khazar ports near the Volga Delta, relying on Khazar or other merchants to carry goods further south? Or did they actively sail the Caspian, establishing direct trading relationships with cities along the Persian coast? While there are accounts of Rus raids and trading voyages across the Caspian, the frequency and scale of these operations compared to their activities at the Volga mouth and within Khazar territory remains a subject of scholarly debate, complicated by the episodic nature of the available sources. The first sight of the Caspian Sea, after months of river travel, must have been a powerful experience. It represented the successful culmination of an epic journey, the opening of a door to a world of unimaginable wealth and exotic goods. It was a moment of arrival, a chance to rest, briefly, trade, and prepare for the equally long and arduous journey back north, laden with silver and stories. The vast, flat, slightly salty expanse stretching before you is the proof that the whispers from the east were true, that the river roads led to a sea, and that this sea was the key to connecting the cold north with the glittering south. The feeling of floating on this vast, unexpected water, the gentle rocking of the boat after the long river journey, it's a sensation that can easily lull you into a state of contented exhaustion, the perfect end to the first leg of a very long trip. You are floating on the Caspian Sea. After months of the narrow confines of rivers, the sheer, flat expanse feels almost overwhelming. The air is perhaps a little salty, but not with the bracing tang of the open ocean. It's a different kind of salt, mixed with the scent of marshland from the vast delta of the Volga, and perhaps, carried on the wind, the distant smells of a large, bustling city. You haven't just arrived at a shoreline, you've arrived at a nexus, a point where the great river highway meets a sea that is, in turn, connected to a network of trade routes stretching deep into Asia. And right here, at the mouth of the Volga, is the heart of that connection, the Khazar capital, Itil. Itil isn't a single city in the way you might understand it. Descriptions from Arab chroniclers paint a picture of a complex settlement spread across islands in the Volga Delta, with different quarters for different ethnic and religious groups, connected by bridges or boat traffic. Imagine a vast Venice or Amsterdam, but built on a much larger, wilder scale, with the constant flow of a mighty river as its lifeblood. This wasn't just a place to trade, it was a center of power, the capital of the Khazar Khaganate, the people who controlled this vital gateway to the east. Arriving here meant entering a highly organized, albeit alien, society, where the rules of commerce and conduct were set by the Khazars. But Itil wasn't the only destination on the Caspian accessible to the Rus. While it was the primary hub at the Volga mouth, the Caspian Sea itself was ringed by important cities connected to wider trade networks. Further south, along the western coast, modern-day Azerbaijan and Iran, lay cities like Derbent, a heavily fortified port known as the Gate of Gates, controlling a narrow passage between the mountains and the sea. Further still, on the southern coast, modern-day Iran, were wealthy cities like Jurjan and Amul, connected to the Silk Road routes leading into Central Asia and beyond, and crucially, closer to the sources of that all-important silver. While some Rus traders might have stuck to Itil, others ventured further south on the Caspian, either in their own boats, adapted for the sea, or by transferring their goods to local vessels or merchants. Stepping ashore in or near one of these Caspian cities, particularly Itil, would have been a sensory explosion. The relative quiet of the river journey was replaced by the roar of a metropolis. Markets were everywhere, vast, sprawling areas where goods from across Eurasia were bought and sold. The air would be thick with the smell of spices you'd never encountered, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, saffron, mingling with the scent of exotic perfumes, drying fish, animal hides, and the general human aroma of a densely populated area. The sounds were a constant hum of activity, merchants haggling in Arabic, Persian, Turkic languages, and the familiar, or not so familiar, sounds of Old Norse from your fellow Rus, mixed with the cries of street vendors, the bleating of livestock, and the distant sound of hammers from workshops. The goods on offer were staggering in their variety and luxury. You would see silks in vibrant colors, woven with intricate patterns, a world away from the coarse woolens of the north. Jewels sparkled in the sunlight, carnelian, lapis lazuli, turquoise, brought from mines thousands of miles away. Fine metalwork, exquisitely crafted weapons and armor, pottery, glassware, items of sophistication and artistry that spoke of ancient, wealthy civilizations. And everywhere, the glint of silver. Piles of silver dirham coins, the currency that underpinned this entire vast trading system. This was the treasure you had traveled across a continent to find. Your purpose here was trade. You had arrived with your cargo of northern goods, high-quality furs, sable, ermine, beaver, honey, wax, perhaps falcons, highly prized in the East for hunting, and a significant and grim reality of the trade, slaves. These were the commodities that were scarce and desired in the wealthy South and East. You would spend your time negotiating prices, seeking out the best deals, and exchanging your northern products for the silver and luxuries that would make the long journey back north profitable. It required sharp wits, patience, and the ability to navigate complex bargaining rituals and languages you might only partially understand, relying on interpreters or the universal language of commerce. Imagine trying to explain the quality of a sable pelt to a Persian merchant who only speaks Farsi, using gestures and hoping you don't accidentally agree to trade your boat for a bag of dried figs. It added a layer of high-stakes charades to your business model. One mainstream historical fact is that cities like Itil, Derbent, and Jurjan were integral parts of this Silver Age, of the Viking era, serving as the primary ports through which vast quantities of silver dirhams from the Islamic world flowed north, fueling the Viking economy and leaving behind the massive coin hoards found in Scandinavia and the Baltic region. These cities were not just stops along the way, they were the destinations where the northern and eastern trade networks fundamentally intersected, facilitating an exchange of goods on a transcontinental scale. Life in these cities wasn't just about the market. You would be exposed to different religions, different customs, different ways of organizing society. In ITIL, you would see mosques, synagogues, churches, and perhaps even pagan shrines, reflecting the Khazars' unique religious tolerance and the diverse population drawn by trade. You might witness public rituals, hear calls to prayer, or observe dietary laws and social customs that were completely foreign to you. It was a profound cultural immersion, a glimpse into a world far more complex and sophisticated than the relatively simpler societies of Northern Europe at the time. A quirky tidbit about the trade in these Caspian cities comes from the demand for specific, sometimes unusual, goods from the north. While furs and slaves were staples, things like walrus ivory, used for carvings and luxury items, amber, from the Baltic, and even graphite, from Northern Europe, used as a pigment, were also traded south. On the return journey, in addition to silver, silks, and spices, Rus traders might bring back exotic fruits, dried, nuts, wine, and even specific types of weapons or armor favored in the East. It wasn't just basic commodities. It was a fascinating exchange of luxury and specialized goods reflecting the unique resources of each region. Imagine trading a walrus tusk for a basket of dates and a bolt of silk, a true cross-cultural shopping spree. Historians still argue about the extent to which the Rus were integrated into the social and political life of these Caspian cities, particularly ITIL. Were they primarily transient merchants, staying only long enough to trade before returning north? Or did some establish more permanent residences, forming communities within the cities and integrating to some degree with the local populations? The degree of their presence and influence beyond purely economic transactions in the core Khazar territories and other Caspian ports remains a subject of scholarly debate, with interpretations drawing on archaeological evidence, coin hoards, and the often fragmentary accounts of contemporary chroniclers. Dealing with the authorities in these cities, especially the Khazars and ITIL, required careful navigation. You had to pay your tolls, adhere to local laws, and maintain a cautious relationship with the powers that be. They were your hosts, your protectors, from other threats, for a price, and potentially your exploiters. But the rewards of successful trade were immense. A single successful journey could bring back enough silver and valuable goods to set you up for life back home, making all the hardships of the river journey, the portages, and the dangers worthwhile. So, you spend your time in the vibrant, chaotic markets of the Caspian cities, surrounded by the sights, sounds, and smells of a world far removed from your northern home. You trade your hard-won cargo for the glittering silver and exotic luxuries of the East. You see people of different ethnicities and religions interacting, bound together by the universal pursuit of profit. It's a fascinating, overwhelming experience, a culmination of your long journey. But eventually, the trading is done. Your boats are loaded, perhaps heavier now with silver than they were with furs. The time comes to turn your gaze north again, to face the long, arduous journey back up the mighty Volga, against the current, through the same lands, past the same peoples, towards home. The busy city fades behind you, the vast Caspian stretches out, and the reality of the return journey begins to settle in. The sounds of the market soften, replaced by the gentle lap of water against the hull, a familiar, soothing sound that carries you away from the glittering cities and back towards the long, slow path north, a motion perfect for letting your mind drift. You've arrived. You're floating on the Caspian Sea, the vast, unexpected end point of your journey down the Volga. The smells of the city, the sounds of the markets, the sheer energy of this southern world wash over you. But this isn't a tourist destination, it's a marketplace. The entire grueling journey, the endless rowing, the back-breaking portages, the risks from rapids and raiders, the complex negotiations with tribes and gatekeepers, it all culminates here, in the act of trade. Your purpose is simple, yet vital: to exchange the goods you've brought from the north for the wealth of the south and east. Think of your boat, moored near the bustling docks, as a floating shop, or maybe a mobile warehouse. You've arrived laden with the products of the northern forests and plains, commodities highly valued in the sophisticated markets of the Byzantine Empire, the Islamic Caliphate, and Central Asia. The primary goods you've brought are furs, honey, wax, and slaves. Let's unpack that cargo, shall we? It's less glamorous than tales of gold and jewels, but infinitely more historically significant. First, the furs. These weren't just any animal skins. They were high-quality pelts from the dense northern forests: sable, ermine, fox, beaver, squirrel. These animals were rare or non-existent in the warmer climates of the south, and their luxurious, warm pelts were highly sought after by the elites of the Byzantine and Islamic worlds for clothing, decoration, and status symbols. Imagine the finest fur coats you can think of. These were the raw materials. Acquiring them involved extensive trade networks stretching even further north and east from the main river routes, dealing with skilled trappers among the Finno-Ugric tribes. Bundling, preserving, and transporting thousands of pelts over thousands of miles was a logistical challenge in itself. One mainstream historical fact is that high-quality furs from northern Europe were a major export commodity driving the eastern trade, highly prized in the markets of the south and east. Next, honey and wax. This might sound less exciting than furs or silver, but these were incredibly valuable commodities in the ancient world. Honey was a primary sweetener, used in food, drink, like mead, and medicine, long before sugar became widely available. Wax was essential for candles, seals, and various crafts. The vast forests of Eastern Europe provided ample opportunities for beekeeping, both wild and managed. Transporting large quantities of sticky honey and heavy wax over long distances added to the cargo and the effort. It's like hauling barrels of sugar and crates of candles across a continent, not glamorous, but essential. Then there are the slaves. This is the darker, more uncomfortable side of the Eastern trade, but one that cannot be ignored. Captives, often taken during raids or acquired from various Slavic, Baltic, or Finno-Ugric tribes along the routes, were a significant and highly profitable commodity. The demand for slaves in the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world was immense, for labor, military service, particularly as Mamluks or Ghilman, slave soldiers, and domestic service. Arab chroniclers frequently mention the Rus trading in slaves, often describing them as physically strong and suitable for military roles. The human cost of this trade is immense, but its economic reality was central to the functioning of these routes. So, that's what you're selling: furs, honey, wax, and people. What are you buying? Primarily silver. In the form of dirham coins, minted by the Abbasid Caliphate and other Islamic dynasties, silver was the lifeblood of this entire trading system. Northern Europe was relatively poor in silver mines compared to the vast sources available in Central Asia, like the mines of the Tashkent region. These mines poured millions of silver coins into the Islamic world, and a significant portion of that wealth flowed north up the Volga and Dnieper rivers in exchange for northern goods. For the Rus and other northern peoples, these silver dirhams were not just currency. They were wealth, status, and a store of value. They could be used for large transactions, melted down to make jewelry and ingots, or hoarded for display of power. The sheer volume of Islamic silver dirhams found in Viking Age hoards across Scandinavia and the Baltic is staggering, a tangible testament to the scale of this Eastern trade. It's the historical equivalent of a massive cash influx from a foreign market, fundamentally reshaping the northern economy. Beyond silver, you sought luxury goods. Silks from Byzantium, Persia, and Central Asia, incredibly soft and finely woven, were highly prized. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and ginger, which could transform bland northern food, were worth their weight in silver. Jewelry made with precious stones like carnelian, lapis lazuli, and turquoise, or crafted with sophisticated metalworking techniques, was also in demand. Fine weapons, glass beads, pottery, and other manufactured goods from the more advanced economies of the south and east rounded out the cargo for the return journey. These were not necessities. They were status symbols, items of comfort and beauty that marked the successful trader and enriched the lives of the northern elite. The process of trading in these Caspian cities was a complex dance of negotiation, assessment of quality, and currency exchange. You'd haggle over the price of a bundle of sable pelts, inspect the weight and purity of silver dirhams, and try to ensure you weren't being cheated. Imagine trying to figure out the exchange rate between beaver pelts and silver coins from a dozen different mints, some of which might be clipped or counterfeit, all while dealing with merchants who speak a different language and follow different customs. It makes navigating modern foreign exchange markets look like child's play. Plus, you had to pay the khazar tolls on everything coming in and going out. It was basically international trade with extra steps, more manual labor, and a higher chance of getting robbed. A quirky tidbit about the goods traded? Besides the staples, the Rus also traded in more unusual items. For example, falcons from the north were highly valued in the Islamic world for hunting. Beeswax was sometimes traded in specific shapes or weights, reflecting regional standards. There's even some debate among historians about whether walrus ivory from the far north made its way down these routes to be carved by artisans in the south. It shows the diversity of the exchange and the ingenuity of the traders in finding markets for unique northern resources. Historians still argue about the relative importance of these different commodities at different times along the eastern routes. Was the initial draw primarily the desire for silver, or was it the demand for high-value furs and slaves in the south that kick-started the trade? Did the balance shift over time as the Rus established stronger polities and became more involved in the slave trade? The exact mix of goods sought and supplied varied depending on the specific region of the route, the political climate, and the changing demands of the markets at both ends, and the precise hierarchy of importance among furs, slaves, and other goods remains a subject of scholarly debate based on interpretations of archaeological finds and written sources. So you spend your time in the bustling markets, negotiating, exchanging, accumulating the wealth that represents the culmination of your epic journey. The piles of silver grow, the bundles of silk and spices are secured, the grim business of the slave trade is concluded. Your boats, once filled with the raw products of the north, are now weighted down with the glittering treasures of the east. The sights, sounds, and smells of the Caspian cities are intense, a vibrant, overwhelming experience. But eventually, the business is done. The time comes to leave this world of southern wealth and turn your gaze back north, to face the long, arduous journey home, against the current, through the same lands, towards the familiar, albeit less wealthy, world you left behind. The goods are secured, the mission accomplished. The vast Caspian Sea now represents not a destination, but the starting point of the return journey, a journey that will demand every ounce of strength and endurance you have left. The gentle rocking of the boat, heavy with its precious cargo, is a familiar, soothing motion as you prepare to leave the glittering cities behind and begin the long, slow drift back up the river roads. You've spent time immersed in the vibrant chaos of the Caspian markets, surrounded by the wealth and exotic goods of the East. You've successfully traded your northern commodities for the coveted silver and silks. But as you navigate these foreign cities and interact with merchants and officials from different cultures, remember that you aren't just an active participant in this trade. You are also, for some, an object of intense curiosity and careful observation. While you see the Khazars, the Bulgars, the Persians, and the Arabs, they see you, one of the Rus, the northern traders who have appeared seemingly out of nowhere, traveling down their great rivers to access their markets. And some of these observers are literate men, scholars, diplomats, and travelers from the sophisticated societies of the Islamic world, who are documenting their journeys and encounters. These are the Arab chroniclers, whose writings provide some of the most valuable, and often most vivid, glimpses we have into the world of the Rus on the eastern routes. Imagine them, perhaps sitting in a shaded courtyard in Itil or Bulgar, quill in hand, noting down their impressions of these strange, powerful traders from the far north. They are seeing you through a lens shaped by their own culture, their own beliefs, and their own experiences, and their descriptions offer a unique, sometimes startling, perspective on your world. Think of yourself, after months on the river, probably not looking your absolute best. Maybe your clothes are worn and patched, your hair and beard are long and perhaps a little matted, and you carry the scent of campfire smoke, sweat, and dried fish. You are likely tall and robust compared to many of the southern inhabitants, accustomed to a colder climate and a more physically demanding life. When you arrive in a bustling city, you stand out. You are the foreigner, the one who has traveled thousands of miles down the great river, bringing valuable goods but also an air of the wild, untamed north. The most famous of these chroniclers is Ahmad ibn Fadlan, an Arab traveler and diplomat from the Abbasid Caliphate who journeyed up the Volga in the early 10th century as part of an embassy to the king of the Volga Bulgars. His account, the Risala, is an incredibly detailed and invaluable source for understanding the peoples of the Volga region, including the Rus. He encountered them directly, observed their customs, and wrote down what he saw and heard. His descriptions are often blunt, sometimes judgmental, but always fascinating. Other chroniclers, like Ibn Rusta, al-Masudi, and Gardizi, also provide important, though sometimes less detailed, accounts based on their own travels or information gathered from other travelers and merchants. These chroniclers describe the Rus' physical appearance in detail. They note their tall stature, fair complexions, and often blonde or reddish hair. Ibn Fadlan famously describes the Rus he saw on the Volga as being tall as date palms, blonde and ruddy, wearing rough clothing and carrying axes, swords, and knives. He notes their bodies are often covered in dark markings or tattoos from fingertip to neck, depicting trees or other figures, perhaps an early form of extreme body art, or maybe just a way to pass the time on those long river journeys. Their customs, particularly those related to hygiene and religion, often fascinated and sometimes repulsed the Arab observers, who came from a culture with strong traditions of cleanliness and codified religious practices. Ibn Fadlan's description of the Rus' communal washing rituals is particularly notorious. He found their practice of sharing a single basin of water to wash their faces, hair, and beards after spitting and blowing their noses into it utterly disgusting. Imagine someone writing a detailed report on your morning shower habits for a foreign government. It might not be the most flattering portrait. This is a quirky tidbit from the Arab accounts, the sheer horror expressed by Ibn Fadlan at the Rus' bathing habits, which he considered incredibly dirty by his standards. The chroniclers also describe the Rus' trading practices and their behavior in the markets. They note their astuteness in business, their willingness to haggle, and their focus on profit. But they also describe their martial nature, their constant readiness for conflict, and their reliance on weapons. Ibn Fadlan mentions that every Rus man is armed with an axe, a sword, and a knife, and is rarely separated from them. He also describes their rituals before trade, including setting up wooden idols and offering sacrifices of food, drink, and even animals, asking their gods for success in their business dealings. It adds a whole new dimension to networking and pitching your product. The accounts also touch upon Rus' social structures and beliefs, including their treatment of women and slaves, and their burial rituals. Ibn Fadlan's graphic description of a ship burial ritual near Bulgar, involving the sacrifice of a slave woman and animals, is perhaps the most famous and controversial passage in his work. It provides a chilling glimpse into the beliefs and practices of some Rus groups, though it's debated how widespread such elaborate and brutal rituals were. A mainstream historical fact is that the accounts of Arab chroniclers like Ibn Fadlan, Ibn Rusta, and al-Masudi are among the most important non-Scandinavian written sources for the history of the Rus and the eastern trade routes during the Viking Age. They provide contemporary, eyewitness, or near-eyewitness, information about the Rus' presence in Eastern Europe, their interactions with local populations and powerful states like the Khazar Khaganate and the Volga Bulgars, and details about their appearance, customs, and economic activities that are not available from other sources. Without these accounts, our understanding of the eastern dimension of the Viking Age would be much poorer. Historians still argue about the reliability and interpretation of these Arab accounts. How accurate were the chroniclers' observations? Were they biased by their own cultural perspectives? To what extent do their descriptions of the Rus refer specifically to people of Scandinavian origin, versus perhaps a mixed group of Norse and Slavic people, or even local elites who adopted the Rus identity associated with the trade? For example, Ibn Fadlan's description of the Rus as speaking their own language and having specific physical characteristics strongly suggests a Scandinavian element, but the degree of assimilation or local recruitment into the Rus groups remains a subject of scholarly debate, with different interpretations placed on the chronicler's words. It's like trying to understand modern-day global business culture based solely on tweets from someone who just visited a foreign country for the first time. You get glimpses, but context and interpretation are key. These accounts paint a picture of the Rus as formidable, pragmatic, and sometimes unsettling figures from the perspective of the more settled, urbanized Islamic world. They were respected for their trading prowess and their martial abilities, but also viewed with a degree of suspicion and cultural distance. They were the conduits of wealth and goods flowing from the north, but they were also seen as fundamentally alien, with strange customs and a fierce, almost barbaric, nature. So, as you load your boats with silver and silks in the Caspian ports, prepare for the long journey back north, know that you are leaving behind a vivid impression on the people you encountered. Your appearance, your behavior, your rituals, they are being noted, discussed, and perhaps even written down for posterity. You are becoming part of the historical record, seen through the eyes of those who stood on the other side of the vast trading network you helped to create. The long, slow journey north awaits, but the memory of your presence here, documented by these chroniclers, will echo through the centuries, a testament to the incredible reach of the northern traders. The sounds of the city fade, the expanse of the Caspian gives way to the familiar current of the Volga, and the rhythm of the river begins to carry you back, a motion perfect for letting your thoughts drift. So you've finished trading in the bustling, overwhelming cities of the Caspian. Your boats, heavy with the glinting silver and soft silks of the east, are ready. The time has come to turn your prow north, to face the long, arduous journey back up the Volga, against the current, through the same lands, past the same peoples, towards the familiar, albeit less wealthy, world you left behind. The Khazar officials have taken their cut, the markets are fading behind you, and the vast, flat expanse of the Caspian Sea is now the start of your return voyage, not the destination. The journey back north is, in many ways, a reversal of the journey south, but with its own unique challenges. You're going against the flow of the mighty Volga now, which means a lot more rowing and a lot less sailing. The portages are still there, still demanding, still requiring you to unload, haul, and reload your precious, now even more valuable, cargo. The same tribes and polities are along the banks, and your interactions might be different now that you're heading home laden with wealth, making you an even more tempting target for bandits or opportunistic rulers. Imagine having successfully completed your cross-country road trip, filled your car trunk with priceless antiques, and now you have to drive back on the same rough roads, but uphill the whole way, and everyone knows you're carrying valuables. It adds a certain level of stress to the scenic drive. This journey back north, repeated over decades and centuries by countless Rus traders, built the foundations of the Eastern trade networks. It brought immense wealth into Northern Europe, funding kingdoms, building cities, and changing the economic and political landscape. The silver dirhams you carry back will be melted down, traded, buried in hoards for safekeeping, or fashioned into magnificent jewelry that speaks of distant lands and successful voyages. But like all things in history, the era of the great Rus River roads to the Caspian wasn't destined to last forever. It flourished for a few centuries, roughly from the late 8th to the 11th century, reaching its peak in the 10th century. But then, slowly, gradually, the routes began to decline. It wasn't a sudden collapse, more like a gradual fading, a slow drying up of the lifeblood that flowed along the rivers. Several factors contributed to this decline. Political instability in the regions through which the routes passed played a major role. The Khazar Khaganate, the powerful gatekeepers of the lower Volga and the Caspian trade, began to weaken and were eventually destroyed by external forces, notably campaigns by Sviatoslav of Kiev in the late 10th century. While this might seem like an opportunity to bypass tolls, it also disrupted the established order and security the Khazars had, in part, provided for a price. The rise of new nomadic groups on the steppes, like the Pecheneg and later the Cumans, made the southern sections of the Dnieper and Volga routes increasingly perilous, with constant threats of raids and ambushes. It's hard to run a reliable shipping business when your main highway is constantly being attacked by hostile gangs. Furthermore, the sources of silver began to shift. The vast mines in Central Asia that had flooded the Islamic world with dirhams started to decline in output in the 11th century, and new sources of silver were discovered and exploited in Central Europe. This led to a gradual decrease in the flow of Eastern silver and a corresponding rise in the importance of trade routes connecting Northern Europe to the silver mines of Germany and Bohemia. The economic landscape was changing, and the focus of European trade began to shift back towards the west and south, away from the distant Caspian. The rise of settled polities in Eastern Europe, particularly Kievan Rus, also changed the nature of the routes. What began as routes used by foreign traders gradually became integrated into the territories of these emerging states. The Rus themselves transitioned from primarily being traders and raiders to becoming rulers and administrators, controlling territory and collecting their own taxes and tribute. The freewheeling, independent adventurism of the early river travelers was gradually replaced by the more structured, albeit still often violent, systems of medieval states. A mainstream historical fact is that the decline of the eastern trade routes to the Caspian Sea in the 11th and 12th centuries was largely due to a combination of the political fragmentation and instability in Eastern Europe and the Caspian region following the decline of the Khazar Khaganate, and the shifting sources of silver production away from Central Asia towards Central Europe. This economic and political realignment significantly reduced the volume of trade flowing along the Volga and Dnieper routes to the south and east. The legacy of these eastern expeditions is profound, even if the routes themselves faded. The Rus' presence along the rivers led to the establishment of key cities like Novgorod and Kiev, which grew into powerful centers of trade and eventually formed the core of the state known as Kievan Rus. The interaction with the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world brought new ideas, technologies, and religions, leading eventually to the Christianization of Kievan Rus. The vast hoards of Eastern silver found across Northern Europe are a tangible testament to the scale and importance of this trade, providing invaluable insights into the Viking Age economy and connections. These journeys weren't just about moving goods, they were about moving people, ideas, and wealth across a continent, fundamentally shaping the history of both Northern Europe and Eastern Europe. A quirky tidbit related to the fading echoes of this trade? Even as the main routes declined, some connections persisted. Silver dirhams continued to filter north for a time, sometimes alongside the newer European silver coins. And echoes of the Eastern contact remained in Scandinavian culture, from place names possibly derived from Slavic or Turkic languages encountered on the routes, to artistic motifs influenced by Eastern designs. The memory of the Great River and the distant lands it led to didn't vanish overnight. Historians still argue whether the decline of the eastern routes was primarily driven by external factors like the collapse of the Khazars and the shift in silver sources, or by internal changes within the Rus Polit. IES themselves, such as their increasing focus on controlling territory and agricultural production rather than long-distance trade. Was it a demand-side collapse in the south, a supply-side collapse in the north, or a political breakdown along the route? The exact interplay of these factors and their relative importance at different times remain subjects of scholarly debate. So, you make the long journey back north, against the current, the weight of the silver a constant reminder of the distance traveled and the risks taken. The return journey is perhaps less filled with the thrill of the unknown, but just as physically demanding. You navigate the same bends, face the same portages, interact with the same peoples, though perhaps with a different dynamic now that you are a seasoned traveler and a successful merchant. The river is your path, your challenge, your home for these long months. And as you travel, you are part of the final chapters of this incredible era of Eastern exploration and trade. The routes won't vanish tomorrow, but the golden age of the river roads to the Caspian is slowly, inevitably, drawing to a close. The world is changing. New powers are rising, new trade routes are opening, and the focus of commerce is shifting. The river roads to the Caspian, once vibrant arteries connecting two worlds, will gradually become less traveled, less profitable, their importance fading into memory. The bustling ports will shrink, the fortified trading posts will crumble, and the knowledge of the thousands of miles of winding rivers and grueling portages will become the domain of historians and archaeologists. The rhythm of the river, which has been your constant companion, the gentle rocking of the boat, the endless flow of the water, the soft sounds of the banks drifting by, these are the final sensory impressions of this epic journey. The history we've traced together, of daring traders, vast rivers, complex empires, and unimaginable wealth, is now settling into the long sleep of the past. The currents of time have carried us to the end of this particular story. The boats are pulled ashore for the last time, the silver is safely delivered, and the long journey is finally complete. The memory of the endless rivers, the shimmering Caspian, the bustling markets, and the quiet, relentless effort required to connect them all, now drifts away like mist over the water, a soothing, distant echo.